morning. It is morning huddle time.
Good morning. It is morning huddle time. I'm Chad Prinky here alongside Stacy Holzinger, as always.
The nature of the beast is the competitive nature of the industry.
Is if you can see it, you can be it.
It's all about the people. The people are what make it great and worthwhile.
Yeah, anything that I think helps build the story behind the company is great.
These are the things that that you're like, we don't need that because we have plenty of work right now. Got it. But if you don't do it now, where are you going to have work in the future? The Morning Huddle Construction Show is fortunate to have 5 sponsors for Season 7, helping us to spread the word and create positive change in the construction industry. And we want to give a shout out to each of them and thank them now. First is Katz Abosch. This is a middle market accounting firm with a deep specialization in construction, tax, audit, accounting, fantastic group of people. Next is Lawrence Law. This is a boutique law firm that works with contractors and helps them with their day-to-day legal needs as well as all of their most significant legal challenges that they might run up against. Lawrence Law. Then we have Sandy Spring Bank, which is a regional bank in Maryland with a group of people who really understand what the needs of construction businesses are and who partner with you to achieve your financial aims. So Sandy Spring Bank. And then we have Marsh McLennan Agency, bonding and insurance professionals really just have unparalleled insight into the construction industry. They're the best in the business. And then lastly, we have Genesis AEC. And Genesis is a full service architecture, engineering, and construction management firm with a deep specialization in the life sciences industry. We also happen to have some of their folks help us with guest hosting from time to time. Thank you to all of our sponsors. Let's get back to the show. All right. We happen to have one of those fellas guest hosting today. Chad Prinky here alongside Tom Hughes from Genesis AEC. Tom, how you doing, buddy?
Chad, what's happening, pal? Good to be back. It's
morning huddle time.
Yeah, man.
I'm fired up. We're just in the front end of my favorite season, which is arguably football, but also autumn. I like them both. I think they happen to coincide. How your boys? How's the Eagles looking?
They are off to a little bit of a rocky start. They got some mistakes that they got to clean up, but they're 2-1. So I would, 3-0 would have been nicer, like your Steelers are. But
that's right, boy.
I'll take 2-1 with 2 ugly wins and an ugly loss. So really, just a lot of ugly, but we're on the plus side of the ledger.
Well, we know a thing or two about ugly in Pittsburgh, pal. I can tell you that right now. The last win was pretty-ish, but the first 2 were making the other team cry uncle. Defense wins championships, or at least wins games against the Atlanta Falcons. Right. But it's always a fun time of year, man, and I'm enjoying the weather change and everything getting nice and all that jazz. And I don't know if you know this about me, Tom, but I like the rain.
You like the rain? You
I
enjoy making sure things are growing, Chad. That's why you like the rain.
That's exactly right. It's growth. It's growth, and it's we get this security of knowing that we're not going to have a drought. Little known fact, my family, when we were kids, we had a home that we lived in had the well run dry, and then we drilled a new well and it ran dry, and then we ended up having to live on a cistern and count on it raining. Otherwise, we had to order water and have water delivered. Right? It was like a whole thing.
Really?
Yeah, man. And so when I was a kid, when it was raining, it basically meant sweet, we can take a bath.
Where did you grow up?
Well, this was one house in rural Western Pennsylvania, and I don't really remember it. I was there from the time I was born to the time I was 5, and then as good luck would have it in this particular case, the state took our home for the Pennsylvania Turnpike.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and we were like, okay, I guess top dollar, darn it. We expect top dollar for this house that has no water.
On my side of Pennsylvania, we always had water, so Water.
Yeah.
Actually, we call it water.
We call it water because it's so plentiful. That's what we call it, water. Yeah. Yeah, no doubt. Well, cool. So, Tom, we have a guest today, Scott Arias. Let me pull Scott on. I know he's had some technical issues getting rolling this morning. Scott, are you with us?
I'm with you. Can you hear me?
Nice. And you sound great. You look great. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Some storms over here in Kentucky today.
Is there really?
Yeah.
Yeah, Kentucky's pretty much a guarantee for good storms in the shoulder seasons. You get a lot of people, spring and fall storms.
A lot of people don't know. We have everything from earthquakes to tornadoes to a lot of different things. People don't think about earthquakes when they think of the East Coast.
You ought to think about giving a speech for like the Kentucky Tourism Board.
Well, that would be easy. There's plenty of bourbon.
There's
bourbon, right? Bourbon,
Kentucky, earthquakes and bourbon, boys. Yeah. Let's go. That's awesome. Well, so Scott Arias is the CEO of ACE Consulting. Scott and I have known each other for a couple of years. We're both a part of a peer group that we're both quite fond of, and through that conversation, realized that we have some opportunity actually to add value to our listeners here and viewers on the Morning Huddle. So Scott is on to talk about time impact analysis. And Scott's business, I mean, I'll take a stab at it, Scott, but then you can pick me up here. But it's, construction management, front to back with clients. They do a ton of work in the federal space. They do a lot of other, state and local work too, but I believe a ton of federal work. And Scott, pick me up. How else would you describe ACE Consulting?
I just tell everybody we're Division I services. Yep. Because everything in Division I, from staffing to project administration to security services, training, it all fits into the Division I of any project specs.
Right on. And is there any particular project type or size or any of that kind of stuff that you guys focus in?
Pretty much federal is about 80% of our work.
Yeah.
And then the other work is, various commercial. I mean, we've worked on some very large projects. I mean, multi-billion-dollar projects recently. And seems like there's more and more of those big projects.
Yeah, mega projects are definitely a thing. They have their pluses and minuses too on their local economies.
Absolutely, labor.
Yep. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, I mean, they can just drain a market of all available labor,
and that's what they're doing here.
And there's more mega projects now than there really. I think it's pretty unprecedented times that way.
It's going to be, especially with the infrastructure work they're going to be doing.
My gosh, yeah, I can appreciate that for sure. So lots of cool opportunities for a company like yours to get involved and help out during times like this. So let's start out as we talk about time impact analysis. What is just the layman's version of time impact analysis? What is that exactly?
Okay, so you mentioned time impact analysis, and that's I always say it's self-explanatory, but it's not. So you have time, you have some type of impact to that time, and then analysis of what that impact is. And I know you're not supposed to use a definition, words with the definition of something, but that's essentially what it is. We just say, okay, when you have an impact to your schedule, we're going to tell you whether you're entitled to more time or not. And then with time comes compensation, because of general requirements, commonly known in construction as general conditions cost, So that's kind of in summary, and we use it commonly within the federal arena because every change order, a time impact analysis has to go into every individual change order. Everyone thinks about money, but nobody thinks of time typically. So, but we're seeing more and more of that in the commercial sector too.
I believe it. Yeah. So Tom has hands-on experience with this type of stuff in his day-to-day. I wonder if there's anything that you would add or ask Scott related to his definition there of time impact analysis, Tom.
Well, I mean, a lot of time, mostly you're going to be focused on the critical path, right, Scott? And we're looking at What's that overall schedule extension, and how does that impact, the staff? Do we need to have a full set of staff going on? If the schedule gets extended out 4 weeks or whatever, is it a full extension of the schedule? Are we going to look at, ways to mitigate the impacts, right? That's probably one of the biggest things that you're doing, is looking at mitigation of the impacts from whether it's a delay, or some other force majeure, right?
Hey, absolutely. And, you mentioned the critical path, and some people don't get it, but not every impact has a corresponding change in time.
Right.
Everything's correlated to that critical path, which when I go do training, because I taught for 10 years as a professor, and when I go to training for like adult groups, like I was on some different podcast, AECE recently, it was interesting to talk about the fact that, what is the critical path? Because you would be surprised how many people don't know what that is. And a simple definition is the longest path of a project, right? But even a simpler definition is any activity that has 0 total float and 0 free float is critical path activity, meaning they have no spare time in it whatsoever. And that's important in the time impact world, because if it doesn't affect the critical path, it doesn't affect the entire project. So the other common misconception about the critical path is that it's always the same. It's always concrete. It's always, masonry. It's always electrical. Well, the truth is it changes every single time you update it, which we typically do updates on a monthly basis or when a change occurs. So, that is a hugely important thing for people to understand. I commonly hear, well, it was there last month, it's not here this month. Well, there's a reason why. So, and that's important to know, because you can know, as a contractor, being a smart contractor, you can know when to submit a change order for a contract extension. So, and I think of one particular project where I had a water tower, and it wasn't due to start till much later in the project, a 2-year project. And we had some design issues or whatever, but eventually that became on a critical path, and we got an extension from that. But if I would have put a change order in for the design work or anything else to do with that water tower much, much sooner, I may have not been entitled to that contract extension.
Right. Once you recognized that there was something that was directly impacting the critical path of the project and impacting you, then it became clear that was that you were actually entitled to that extension.
Absolutely. And once again, time is money, and Tom will tell you, when you have staff out there, that is expensive. We can't subcontract, and we don't subcontract the management. We don't subcontract, we vendor contract, but we get the purchase order like a Porta-Johns. What about all the infrastructure, the job site trade, or all that stuff? Typical project I see probably right around 25 million-ish range has a general requirements cost of anywhere between $50,000 to $100,000 a month. At 1% profitability, it doesn't take too many months for you to lose your butt on it,
No doubt.
So, as Bart Simpson would say. So,
all right, cool.
I was trying to relate to something that you would be interested in, Chad.
Yeah. You nailed it. That's where I am. So, all right. There's, in addition, we got into this conversation about, now we have a good feel for what a time impact analysis is. And I guess it is the primary or only use really just dealing with changes and presenting that data to the owner, or how else am I using my time impact analysis? So that what's the value in doing this?
Well, there's two other items I can think of right off the top of my head. One of them is it sounds really complicated, but it's not. It's called the retrospective claim analysis, and we do this very, very commonly for claims after projects are complete. I'm not sure you guys are aware, but litigation is rampant in construction.
Yes.
And that's why there's so many construction lawyers out there. But we have to be able to figure out, okay, when there's a lawsuit, how much time was actually lost or gained over an entire duration of a project. And that's it can be very complex, but it's be very simple. It's really as simple as this. When you do research, you learn that when you have things that you can't control, you have to write an assumption that you can't control that. So you have to focus on what you can control. So I take a baseline schedule and say, okay, if everything else went all right, how would this project have finished given this one subcontractor's performance? Now, that's not 100% fair because there are other things that affect that subcontractor. But when you do a retrospective analysis, you have limited information to work with. The other thing you could do is if you have a substantial amount of information is you can go all the way back to the data reports and go through and align what actually occurred, an as-built schedule. There's such a thing, an as-built schedule to say how it actually occurred. And believe it or not, many times that's a requirement, a submittal requirement in the contract documents. So, and the other thing I was going to mention on a time impact analysis, you can also do it from a modeling perspective. You can model different things before you make a decision. So that's hugely important to say an owner saying, hey, I want to change the design. How does that affect me? And I remember one particular project, we had doors, and the doors it was a law office. So the doors were real tall. They're like 10 foot tall, supposed to be like the courtroom doors, big doors. Well, we couldn't get those 10-foot doors. They're really 10 or 12, but we couldn't get those doors for like 16 weeks. And so simply by changing the door and modeling how an 8-foot door or 9-foot door would look, would impact the project schedule, we could actually make those decisions with the owner. So modeling is a huge part of it, and we do a lot of that also.
Nice. I like it. I mean, at the end of the day, isn't it really just having a really firm during construction? It's about, and prior to and during construction, it's about having a really firm grasp on what things that are happening or could happen that impact schedule and what the impact on the overall project will be, the costs associated with that, or how we have to get things if we must hit schedule regardless of that. How do we regain? How do we get back on balance? It's really just having mastery over this stuff. Do you find that most construction management companies, do you find that most CMs or GCs have a good handle on this?
So I've been in the business for over 30 years, and I know I don't look like it. I'm beautiful, but
you don't look way over 40.
I've been in the business for 30 years, and in the 30 years I've been in the business, I've seen very little use by any contractor, primarily because of technology. Because I don't know if you guys remember back in the early 90s, Microsoft Project wasn't really there, So from that to current day, where most general contractors actively use it. In fact, if I had to, it's a matter of now what software systems they're using. Even a simple, and I say simple, but even say if you're building a home, I've seen many home builders just use a standard Excel spreadsheet, which is fine. You know,
Sure.
if it's a small project, no big deal. But that's not a dynamic software, meaning that when changes occur, you have to replan the entire project. I mean, the entire schedule is inaccurate the day after you put one together in a Microsoft project, in a Microsoft Excel kind of bar chart, you know?
Yep.
But yeah, I see more complex projects going to an Oracle Primavera model.
Yeah.
And I see most Microsoft projects, and Microsoft has done a great job. I mean, Microsoft has done a really good job at making their software systems better, but I don't know if most people realize this, about between 70 and 80% of all their work when they sell Microsoft project goes to IT companies. It doesn't even stay in construction.
Sure.
So if you've ever been a Microsoft project, you'll see there's a lot of features that we don't use,
Right.
you know, because they don't apply to us. Now, Primavera is more of a, you know, and I'm not favoring one software or another. I'm just saying, just stating reality. Primavera, although higher cost, is more tuned into construction, really. So I think it's a matter of software systems now, not whether they're using it or not, although there are people out there that are not using it.
So we talked about one term that sounds complicated, but turns out not to be too complicated in the form of the retroactive claim analysis. There's this other term that we talked about prior to today, which is a Frag Net. What's that?
I know it sounds like a disease, you know,
or
it sounds like,
or something that's going to catch like potential explosives and keep them from getting to me.
But a Frag Net is simply a fragmented network, and that's all it stands for. And so you take a network, a schedule, and then you take a fragment of that schedule. So the easiest way to explain it is, if I'm pouring concrete and I have a delay in the reinforcing steel getting there, I can go ahead and lay out a fragmented network that expands one activity into several activities to show an impact that is going to occur. So, you know, one of the activities for reinforcing steel, if I didn't plan for it, would be procurement. So I would put a fragment. I would start with, I'd create a milestone saying, hey, we have a delay in, the reinforcing steel. And then we have how much that procurement is. So we're just taking one individual activity and fragmenting it into several different activities to make it easier and more clear for someone to understand.
And I'm assuming that also, Tom and I were laughing earlier this morning as we were talking about, it's when you get into this stuff, how much of this is really just to figure out who is holding the bag, who has the financial impact, right? Because if I look at it on a schedule and I say, hey, concrete was delayed, concrete guy has the bag. But if the concrete guy runs a frag net, concrete guy says, actually, reinforcing steel, is the problem. And, how much of it is really all of this is tied to who owns the responsibility?
Well, if you ask me percentage wise, I'd say 90% of it.
Yeah, that's what I figured.
And the 10% is only those quote unquote smart contractors who have figured out we can use this to make decisions, because that's what it's really about. I have a tool, I want to use it to make a decision, and you either do that or you do it on the back end, and you hire me to work to do an analysis for you. So it's where you pay. And let me tell you, when you pay on the back side, you pay a lot more than you pay on the front side. It's kind of like, what I talk about education all the time. And, most people, because I was a professor, think I'm just this huge advocate of education. And although I think education is good, experience is by far more important, right? But I also think wisdom is the combination of experience and education too. So, and I don't mean
maturity. I got to work on that one.
And I don't mean education as being going to a college per se. You could attend a 10 class.
But there's a difference between knowledge and application of that knowledge in real world scenarios. And you know, without one or the other, it's hard to have the wisdom, right? I think that's a nice way of putting it. And
because everybody wants to carve out education or carve out experience, depending on what side you are. But that really is important in what we're talking about here, because you can't just jump into the scheduling world without having a basic understanding of how it goes. Right. Trust me, I tried to do it. It took me 10 years to realize I was doing it wrong.
And that's education.
Yes. So it's, you know, it is a piece. And then once you understand some of the basics through experiences, you will, you know, gain the knowledge that you ultimately will use to parlay off to other people, you know? So, so I think that's a really, really big thing. Especially, I see a lot of field staff coming from universities now, which I don't know if you see that, Tom, or not, but that's changing the dynamic a little bit there, related to, you know, maybe the book understanding of what, you know, critical path is, or what scheduling is, or whatever, you know. So
yeah, I mean, I think you kind of always get that when you get you know, young people coming out of school. Basically the old adage of, well, I don't know what you're doing, but my book says you're doing it wrong, right?
Yeah.
somebody brand new shows up. So yeah, I mean, we've kind of always had that and seen that, but you know, I like what you said there about the mix of, you know, experience. Wisdom is really the mix of experience and education.
And you know, it's, once again, it doesn't have to be formal education. There are plenty of professional development classes out there, and plenty of certifications out there. And related to what we're talking about here, time impact analysis is not an easy thing. So if you don't understand how to calculate calculate float, you don't understand what free float, the difference between free float and total float is.
Yep.
You're going to be in trouble when you have to sit down and try to negotiate a change order or deal with a claim, you know. So you got to have that basic understanding. On the other side of it, you also need to be able to, you know, Tom is going to understand much better, is there truly going to be a delay here, or are we wasting our time?
Yep.
Because, you know, sometimes we go through the entire process and people will spend money and they get nothing from it. And I feel really terrible about that, because I want to be a value add, you know, but the experience to be able to say, you know, hey, Tom was out on the job and he knows what happened. Do we think we're really entitled to anything here? Because if concrete was a subcontractor's responsibility or delay, how does that affect the mason, and yada, 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 because the story is what matters. And then related to that, and related to scheduling, I do want to mention is that this whole concept of time impact analysis 100% gets down to keeping proper project documentation.
Yeah, no doubt.
And I can't say that. I don't even know how to you know, convey that more than I already have. I mean, documentation is huge in construction, and especially in site leadership roles.
Yep.
What do you think, Tom?
So, I mean, you know, of course, you know, everything, you need to document everything from phone conversations, you know, you follow that up with emails, even to, you know, one of the things we look at, like when we have morning huddles, for instance, who's in the morning huddle? What did we talk about? You know, taking meetings at morning huddles, so that when, you know, that's when you're discussing who's supposed to be where for the day. And it's an informal meeting, but it could be something that comes up in litigation. What was discussed that day? Who was supposed to be where? you know, these are all things that, you know, of course, that should be getting documented.
Yeah, sorry about that, Scott. I had muted you there because of the feedback. Hopefully, that's better under control.
I think I got it fixed. I think I got it fixed now.
Okay,
Can you
good.
hear me? Okay.
Yep, go for it. Yeah, how are you going to respond to Tom? Sorry.
You know, and I was just going to add to that. I see common litigation off of equipment sitting, and most people don't document. Hey, a dozer was sitting over there, but a dozer costs money if it's just sitting. It costs much money as this sitting as it's going to cost, you know, if it's moving. Maybe a little more for fuel, but there is a lot of litigation related to that documentation, and that documentation is key if you're ever going to deal with the time impact analysis, at least on the back end. I like the idea of the modeling thing, because if I'm an owner, I want to know the impact of the decisions I'm making. And we serve as owners reps for the government. We do a lot of National Park Service. They're doing a lot of work around the United States, which is great for everybody, because, you know, if you ever been out to a national park, man, they're doing a lot of great work out there.
They are.
But you know, they want to know, hey, okay, there's an impact. What? Let's look at the schedule, and they actually require us to do an analysis, and that makes it a little tough, because most of our field staff that we have are an older generation, and our field staff being an older generation, they didn't learn Microsoft Project, right? Yeah. So one of the things that we tried to do to kind of bridge that a little bit was, they may not understand Microsoft Project, but they sure understand everything about the job, about constructability issues. So how do we take that and get it somewhere? So what we do is, we have our field staff out there, but we have an office staff that supports, you know, those decisions and helps model those things. And, you know, one of the great things that come out of COVID, actually probably the only thing, the great thing that came out of COVID, was the use of technology like we're using now. You know, in construction, I mean, I flew to Kazakhstan and back for a 2-hour meeting. That's ridiculous, you know. Yeah. But now it's just, you know, hey, let's get on Teams, or let's get on, you know, Zoom or whatever. And that has changed overnight. It seemed like it was just like overnight, everything just changed related to how we communicate. Even, you know, simple things like, we use Teams, we use chat in Teams, and I have that up constantly, you know, in the background. And I communicate more probably on Teams today than I do email, or probably equal, you know. And it's the game of communication is changing dramatically. And I see, speaking of changes, we have a lot of changes with AI going into the scheduling world, and that's going to help things like modeling and time impact analysis much easier, rather than having to manually go through a whole bunch of data.
Scott, what type of programs or tools do you guys use for analyzing, you know, like a CPM schedule, or pulling out a Frag Net and analyzing that for any kind of delay impact?
Well, you know, you can use take Primavera, for example. They have a claim digger in there, which goes through and it tells you everything that changes. You can compare 2 different schedules, so you can go in there and look at baseline compared to actual, or Frag Net from one point to another point, and then you can see all the changes that occurred. Once again, it's only as good as the input you put in. So if the superintendent's not giving information or not inputting the actual dates, then most of that data is irrelevant. So when we do a lot of the claims analysis, we do a lot of, hey, manual work, because the manual work to put
it wasn't done up front.
Wasn't done.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's the cheaper time to do it, which is what you mentioned, already. And I think that's right. Question. So let's say I'm a general contractor and I'm fired up about this conversation because I'm like, man, I hate when I have to go get my scheduling guy, right, and say, hey, we have a claim, we need to defend ourselves, or whatever. Let's say they're using Procore today.
Yeah.
Are you saying they should set up a Primavera? And I know you're not a Primavera spokesperson, so we'll make that clear, but I'm just using this as an example. They should set up a Primavera project schedule at the outset, and then will Procore communicate with Primavera and provide sort of real-time updates with the reality in the schedule as things occur?
And you can to do that, but Primavera's actually made it, and Project for that matter. Most software systems related. There's another one called Phoenix out there too. They've made this whole concept of on the cloud being a big thing. So, most companies are pushing that direction rather than, using. There's integration to construction management softwares like Procore, right? But and I'll even take it a step further, 4D, so how schedule coordinates with design too.
Yep.
I got a chance to view and look at and analyze a $1 billion hospital we built here in Kentucky, and it was this whole concept of 3D is an amazing thing. They were bending conduit at a shop and then bringing it to the building, and it all fit in place. It was just incredible how they had everything because
it's working the way we always said it could.
It could, it could. And I was watching a history thing about they're building a racetrack in Dubai, and when they used the scheduling software, they realized their crane placement was incorrect, because if they wouldn't have the reach in order to get everything. So if they moved it to another area, they could not have to set up and redo it completely. So there's a lot of cost savings and a lot of value added here. This is hopefully we use it in a way where it's helpful rather than using it as a claims tool, which unfortunately most time it is.
And I'm sorry to belabor the point. I'm going to go back to the previous question for a moment just to make sure that I get it. Is that when I asked about an integration between Primavera and Procore, you said, yeah, those exist, but Primavera is now doing this stuff on the cloud. So is Project, so is Phoenix. They're doing. I get that they're doing it on the cloud, but what I'm trying to reconcile is, as you said earlier, this as-built schedule. And, I can have it planned out in Primavera to the nines and have it, this project beautifully scheduled down into all these little subcategories and all that kind of jazz. But, as soon as the bullets start flying, right, or as soon as somebody gets punched in the face, boom, plans change and we start operating in reality. How do we reconcile this amazing plan that we've put together in Primavera with reality as it goes in real time? Do I constantly update manually Primavera? Do I just use my CM tool? Is Primavera now my CM tool? How do I do this?
Well, how Primavera does it to integrate, they use APIs to integrate. So once that data is inclusive in the software, it'll automatically auto-populate into the different construction management software systems. The key here is being able to input it. And we've made it to where, because I remember days when we didn't have cell phones on the job site. I remember when we had the old landlines.
Sure.
Because I remember I cut one, it cost $3,000 to fix, So, we go from that to now having, a internet provider on the job site that can, work at a speed of 100 megabytes per second, or 1 gig per second. So you take that now, and Primavera has seen that. The problem is that it's not the software, it's not the platform, it's the ability to use it. And that, unfortunately, in my humble opinion, and you got to take this from me being an educator at one point too, is there's just not enough of that out there, and universities are not doing a good enough job to push out that information. And honestly, organizations that are in construction, like AGC and stuff like that, they have limited resources to be able to provide that data, but they're probably the perfect position group to be able to help that change occur.
Got it. All right, cool.
So just real quick, Mark Drury made a good point in the comments about, basically setting up that initial schedule and baselining the schedule, properly baselining the schedule. A lot of people do not do that, or they do it and they don't do it properly, or they don't save the baseline, so that as the schedule moves along and the bullets start flying and things happen and schedules change, you compare what your baseline schedule was at the beginning of the project to, where you're at now 3 months down the road, when there's been delays in steel delivery, or, submittals that had to go. There was a lot of back and forth on submittals, which caused material delays, like doors and hardware or HVAC equipment to push out, which then potentially changes the critical path. Having that document trail is very important.
And what's crazy about that entire thing is, even when we, request or push people to provide this information, it's so difficult. And I don't know why it's not difficult. I think it's just a matter of how we go about gathering that data to be able to properly, say this is what occurred. And you brought up about baseline. The funny thing is that when you set a baseline, the project scheduling software doesn't do much. And in fact, it's funny because it just blinks at you. And then you wonder, what the heck did it just do? And you have no idea, because, it doesn't really do anything. But at least you don't see it do anything, when in reality, it establishes where everything starts as planned. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you've got to understand visually what that baseline looks like, when you're working in the software, right? Like you said, it doesn't do anything. It just kind of, shows like this. When you're comparing the schedules, it'll show kind of like the grayed out version of the baseline and what the current schedule looks like, right? That's what you're kind of referring to.
Yes, and they got this new thing too, because you can turn a whole bunch of different bars on. There's a whole bunch of neat features out there, but one of them is you can turn on a bar to say, hey, or an arrow indicator saying this is where it should have started according to baseline.
Yep.
But this is where it actually started, and it's really easy visually to be able to look at it. I mean, once again, these software companies have done an excellent job at creating a system that was really created in the 1950s. I mean, most people don't know that, that in the 1950s, the Navy created the best organization in the world. Not that I'm biased or anything, but the best, organization in the world. The Navy used it to construct submarines, and why did they do it to construct submarines? It's because in the old days, you had a hole and you got to get everything in the hole. And if you don't get it in the hole and you close it up, you got a problem. So that's where the critical path method came from. It's actually more important now, because the way they do subs, they do it in slices.
Huh.
So it's so much more important for them to understand the sequence of everything to be done. So that's kind of interesting fact.
That's awesome.
Tom,
any final questions before we let Scott go?
Put me on the spot here. Let me look at the looking at the chat.
Yeah, I think we've got them covered. The stuff that was coming up, we were weaving in throughout. I think I don't imagine anybody sitting there, feeling like they didn't get a key question answered. I think, but again, we've had some really good people chiming in. Thanks to Mark Drury and Matt DeGorsey and so on. Good stuff.
And then just the one final thought from me is, when you are setting up that initial baseline schedule, is making sure you've got, all of the right people in the room, as they like to say. You're building a last planner schedule with the people that are doing the work. It's not just a schedule that's created in a vacuum without all the right outside input.
Absolutely. The funny thing I've learned is most people want to mark up a schedule, but they don't want to put one together.
Yeah, right.
So freaking true.
So everybody loves a red pen, but nobody wants to do the hard work that's involved.
It's so true. And I should I actually just call out for maybe Scott, this would be of interest to you too. Comment from Matt DeGorsey just came in that said CPM schedules, P6, MSP, Phoenix, Outbuild, those 4 brands can now be uploaded into, I think I can pop this on the screen. Yeah, cool. Can now be uploaded into PM software, Procore, Build, albeit some have more integrated features. We're going to be demonstrating this at the next Mid-Atlantic Procore community meeting on October 16th for anyone interested. And so on LinkedIn, if you go to the show notes, you'll see that chat along the side here.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's and this goes to what the core of what I'm really saying here, and that I appreciate, no, scheduling is scheduling, and then construction management is construction management. Well, but what I'm saying is hold on, everything we're doing every single day impacts the schedule, and wouldn't it be awesome if we could have a baseline and we could actually get an automated deviations chart, from the baseline that's just coming from me tracking the project and not having to go to your point also earlier, Scott, on knowing how having the AI components do the heavy lifting for you. If you're doing the front end data collection, which you're saying is the biggest gap, and we're getting it into these awesome tools, we should have the ability to do some pretty great things very efficiently to both, run a better project and protect ourselves in the event that a project goes bad. Scott, you're a wealth of knowledge, man. My biggest takeaway from this conversation, in addition to just a bunch of cool education, is fundamentally we need to make sure that contractors have a culture and a habit of building and tracking schedules and the biggest message is do the heavy lifting up front, and there's not a lot to do at the end.
Absolutely. And I'll leave you with one last thought too, is, when they do evaluations for federal projects, they look at best value. One of the documents they request is a project schedule. And most people don't understand why. Why do you want a project schedule? It's because it's a litmus test for contractors to see if they know what they're doing. And that's all it is. And so it's extremely helpful to understand it and be able to communicate that too. And I see the ones who are successful and the ones who are not, and those are the ones who actively use their schedule, and the ones who are not are ones who don't.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being with us, Scott. This has been great. We'll grab your. I know there's some stuff that you're going to provide us.
Yeah, I'm going to put I'm going to put a PDF with some information on time impact analysis, that whatever. Also put some contact information if you want some greater clarity. We actually have a helpline at ACE for instances such as those.
Awesome, beautiful. We look forward to it. We'll drop it in the show notes. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, Chad, Tom.
Thanks, Scott. See you.
All right, Tom, let's close this thing out. So it's so funny. I naturally resist the details, right? The details are not my happy place.
Yeah, it takes time to get in them and through them.
I can tell Scott's a details guy. Yeah. I can tell he would enjoy being down and dirty on a project.
Yeah. For sure.
That's cool. So hey, so next week, I don't think we're hanging out again, though. It was fun to have you here. I think it'll be Stacy and I next week. We're gonna be talking to Will Hudson from Bespoke Metrics. They're a data management and analytical model development company that focuses on creating basically like data dashboards for contractors.
Okay.
It'll be interesting discussion, like basically kind of in a way building on the theme that we were talking about just now, with Scott, though for different purposes. Just some of the using the data that you're gathering to make better business decisions in your company is, I think, applicable in all industries, but certainly nice to talk to somebody who spends their full time doing it in construction, which is cool.
Right. Like looking at key performance indicators, I'm assuming, to kind of keep score. And
yeah.
if you're not keeping score, how do you know if you're winning? Right.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So we look forward to having that. And Tom, I look forward to hanging out with you again, both on the show here and in person the next time you find your way down here, or I find my way up there, buddy.
Right on, bud.
Thanks, guys. And just one final note for our audience. Stacy and I love doing the Morning Huddle Construction Show, but it is neither of our full-time job. And one thing that I think we don't take enough time to remind people of, and I'll take a moment here, is to say that Stacy runs an awesome company. She runs a company called Steel Toe Communications. You can reach that at steeltoecom2ms.com, steeltoecom.com. Stacy builds websites and, creates social media strategy and runs social media for exclusively for contractors. And she is top notch. I would strongly recommend Stacy and her group. And I run a consulting company called Well Built Construction Consulting. We're a group of 10 people and growing of really, really dedicated construction industry minds. People, I think I've done a decent job of hiring people who are smarter than I am on different topics. And while I may focus on, business strategy and leadership, we have people that focus on estimating and project management and, field oversight and leadership and financials and HR and all that kind of jazz, which is pretty cool. So please check us out, wellbuiltconsulting.com. Thanks very much, as always, for being a loyal fan of the show. If you or anybody that is creating positive change in the construction industry and should be a part of this show, please reach out. Thanks.